The relationship between the Philippine National Railways and the Mindanao Railway dates back to the establishment of the PNR in 1964. Republic Act 4156, the law that created the PNR, referred to a government-owned railway in Mindanao in Section 3 of the law, which stated 50 million pesos of the authorized capital of the Philippine National Railways shall be invested in the purchase of motive power and rolling stock for the railway project in Mindanao, and 5 million pesos or so much thereof for the survey of said railway project. From its inception, the PNR was supposed to help establish the Mindanao Railway. When the PNR's enabling law was amended by Republic Act 6366 in August 1971, it retained the commitment to the Mindanao Railway. However, it is worth noting that while RA 6366 had increased the PNR's authorized capital stock from 250 million to 650 million pesos, the capitalization for the Mindanao Railway remained at 50 million pesos as before. The effort to establish a railway in Mindanao took a downward turn when Presidential Decree 741 was signed in July 1975. PD 741 amended the PNR's enabling law to improve its fiscal position. However, as part of this reform, it removed explicit mention of the creation of the Mindanao Railway from the law. The decree freed the PNR of the obligation to pursue railway projects beyond its existing lines to include Mindanao. As unfortunate as this development was, it is important to put it in context. During this period, the PNR had its share of problems. It was already struggling with the railway network it had and twice had to be recapitalized by Congress. It was not in a financial position to create an all-new railway in the South. Thus, efforts to build a railway in Mindanao had been set aside, at least from the PNR's perspective. The Mindanao Railway didn't return to the national agenda until the administration of Fidel Ramos. In 1992, Ramos signed Memorandum Circular 23 that created a medium-term Philippine development plan that would run from 1993 to 1998. This plan included, among many others, a feasibility study for the Mindanao Railway under a build-operate-transfer arrangement. Subsequent administrations followed with their own executive orders. The Estrada administration created the Mindanao Rail System Task Force in February 2002, which the Arroyo administration replaced with the Mindanao Railway Project Office, or the MRPO, in May 2006. The MRPO remains responsible for the project to this day.
Sir, you support the Mindanao Railway, the CCT with jobs, livelihood.
Dapat ang unang Mindanao Railway talaga. Kasi ang Mindanao Railway, mas kailangan natin. We must have a train, a cargo train that's all over Mindanao. Mindanao does not suffer the ravages of typhoons. Mindanao enjoys a fertile climate. Diyan tayo kukuha because that is our bread basket sa ating bayan.
Sir,
and we have to develop, and in order to, even in the products, farm to market routes improve. If you can have the train, mas madali. It takes only a lot of space and it is eternally running around.
The Duterte administration's promise to create a railway in Mindanao sparked the most significant progress in the project to date. The Mindanao Railway that is in place today combined the National Strategic Railway Development Plan that had been inherited from past administrations with a number of fragmented regional studies, namely the Cagayan de Oro-Iligan Corridor Study, the pre-feasibility study for the Tagum-Davao-Digos Corridor, and a technical assessment of a railway that connected Iligan, Pagadian City, and Zamboanga. The combined plan, which supersedes all that came before, now features a circumferential railway around Mindanao. The project was now broken up into 10 phases, with the first phase being set in the Davao region, also known as the Tagum-Davao-Digos segment. Each phase required their own feasibility and environmental impact studies, as well as various validation activities. They also required approval of the proposed budget by the National Economic Development Authority, or NEDA. For Phase 1, funds for the studies came by way of official development assistance from the Asian Development Bank. These were part of a group of projects that availed of the ADB's Infrastructure Preparation and Innovation Facility. NEDA approved Phase 1 in 2019. Another phase whose feasibility is currently being studied is the Phase 3 segment in northern Mindanao. Funding for this study comes by way of the Public-Private Partnership Center of NEDA. Phase 1 consisted of stations in Tagum, Carmen, Panabo, 3 stations in Davao City, Santa Cruz, and Digos. Additionally, a main depot was to be constructed in Tagum and a sub-depot in Davao. Unlike previous attempts driven by regional proponents, Phase 1 went beyond studies and graphical renders. Funding, specifically for the Mindanao Railway, was approved in various General Appropriations Acts. Concrete monuments were laid down along the finalized alignment. City ordinances that reserved the land affected by the railway alignment were passed. The railway alignment in Davao City is represented in the Davao Zoning Ordinance by gray areas with red diagonal lines. The Bato Station also serves as a depot for the Davao Public Transportation Modernization Program as part of an intermodal station. The Langub Station serves as the Davao City sub-depot for the railway. The Mudiang Station will be built around the Mudiang Elementary School. The contentious process of acquiring land for the right-of-way had also started. Resettlement sites for the affected persons were acquired and construction had started. By January 2024, the structures at the Tagum resettlement site were ready for inspection by Department of Transportation officials and were scheduled for turnover to beneficiaries in June of the same year. The Digos resettlement site in Barangay Cogon had already been selected by June 2023 and approved later in October. Another milestone was reached when the project management consultant contract was awarded on October 2021. The China Railways Design Corporation and the Guangzhou Wanan Construction Supervision Company Limited Consortium had submitted the winning bid of 3.1 billion pesos and was given the notice of award on August 2021. The contract was signed 2 months later. After decades of false starts, the Mindanao Railway project was finally underway. Very early in Phase 1, the Duterte administration had taken a geopolitical decision to select China as the partner of choice for the project. The rationale for this choice is a lengthy and complicated topic by itself, so it shall be discussed in a separate video. This decision led to project timelines that were different from projects that were more commonplace throughout the country, such as those from Japan or South Korea.
Doon sa tanong na ODA status, ang proseso po ng China-funded projects ay kakaiba yung loan nila kaysa sa ordinaryong loan po ng ibang funding. No? Sa ibang funding source po, nauuna yung loan and then procurement. Sa China-funded po, nauuna po ang procurement kaysa sa loan. Sa ngayon po, meron po sa Mindanao Railways na dalawang procurement process. Ang isa, ang project management consultant, at ang isa ay ang procurement po ng design and build contractor. Ongoing po ngayon ang project management consultant procurement process at once matapos po ito, ay susulong na po ang loan process para sa procurement po ng project management consultant. Doon naman po sa design and build contractor, hinihintay lamang po namin ang shortlist po ng mga design and build contractors na magpa-participate sa bidding process. Kung makukuha ho namin ito sa lalong madaling panahon, uusad po agad ang procurement process at pag natapos po, saka lamang po namin ino-negotiate ang loan process po.
Phase 1 was scheduled to go into full operation by June 2023 with partial operation by March 2022. To achieve this, completion of right-of-way acquisition should have been completed by September 2021, with the project management consultant, or PMC, which would oversee the project on behalf of the Department of Transportation, selected in February of that year. Because of the way China handled its projects, PMC selection was actually a prerequisite to finalization of the credit facility that would have funded the construction of the Mindanao Railway. PMC selection would then open the door to selection of the design and build contractor, finalization of the loan by the China Export-Import Bank, and then finally the start of detailed engineering design. For a variety of reasons, not the least of which was the global pandemic of 2020, this timeline could not be met. PMC selection wasn't made till August of 2021, and China never submitted the shortlist of design and build contractors. Philippine presidential elections were held on the 9th of May 2022, and by the 30th of June of that year, responsibility for the Mindanao Railway would pass to Ferdinand Romualdez Marcos. To make way for the start of the incoming administration, the Department of Finance of the Duterte administration notified China in May 2022 that all still pending loan applications were only valid up to May 31, 2022, after which the applications would be considered withdrawn. Since then, the Philippines has been seeking alternative sources of official developmental assistance for the Mindanao Railway. While problems with the loan from China was a significant stumbling block for the Mindanao Railway, it was not actually the full story.
And beyond NCR, larger scale railway systems like the 102-kilometer Mindanao Railway project, the Panay Railway project, and the Cebu Railway system will be integrated as a vital part of our transport and communication systems.
The project's budgetary problems can be broken down into two independent areas: budget for construction and feasibility studies, and budget for buying land for the project's right-of-way. It is very important to emphasize that these are separate budgets, even though they are both part of the same project. The Department of Transportation continues to express a preference for official development assistance for construction and feasibility studies. As we've seen earlier, the feasibility for Phase 1 was provided by the Asian Development Bank. The loan from China would have provided the funds for actual construction of the railway. The budget for right-of-way, on the other hand, comes from the national budget. The Mindanao Railway project activities that continue to this day actually comes from this. The rest of this video will focus on this funding source. The following table shows the number of affected persons that have already been paid as of February 12, 2024. The Mindanao Railway Project Office shared this information with the Mindanao Railway Watchers community based on data reported by the various local government units. Payments to affected persons have started, but only barely. For example, in Tagum City, the site of the main depot and thus the largest site for Phase 1, only 10 families received any compensation. 10 out of a total of 157 families, as reported by the Tagum City Planning and Development Office. Even for the fortunate few that received payment, there were still complications. The following graphic shows the ordeal of a Mindanao Railway Watchers community member. We received copies of relevant documentation, but for the affected person's privacy, identifiable information has been removed. The MRPO survey team visited this affected person's property in Toril on February 24, 2020, and affixed the following stickers. The green tag indicated that the structure on the property had been visited in a previous survey, and the pink tag meant that the house had associated structures. Fences, septic tanks, and the like are classified as associated structures. Other properties in other locations also had blue tags. Those were structures that were not included in previous site inspections. 7 months later, the MRPO sent 2 notices that were required by the Right-of-Way Act of 2016. The first was the notice of taking, which was sent out on September 8, 2020. This notified the affected person that their property was being taken by the Philippine government for the project. In this notice, the property owner is given strict instructions not to make any development or construction on the property without first consulting the Department of Transportation. Then on September 22, the second notice was sent out. This was the request for donation. This document simply gave the property owner the opportunity to notify the government that they wanted to be paid compensation for the property, and they were not interested in donating it in favor of the project. 6 months would pass before the property owner was notified of the appraised market value of their property by way of an offer to buy, or OTB. The OTB specified both the value of the land and the name of the third-party appraiser that was responsible for the valuation. By law, the Department of Transportation was not allowed to determine the value of the property by itself and had to rely on professional appraisers that were accredited by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or the Philippine Central Bank. It is important to note that the OTB only refers to the land. The structure upon it is covered by a document called the Offer to Compensate, or OTC. More about OTCs later. Signing and the subsequent processing of the OTB by the Department of Transportation led to the issuance of a Deed of Absolute Sale, or DOAS, for the land. In this property owner's case, the DOAS was signed on October 22 and then formally received by the Department of Transportation head office on December 10, almost a month and a half later. With the DOAS signed and processed, it was time to pay the affected person. However, to release the funds, government regulations required the issuance of a Certificate of Availability of Funds, or CAF. The CAF was issued 4 months later in April 29, 2022. On September 20, 2022, the first payment was issued to the affected person. From the first signs that the affected person would lose their property to the project to the first payment, it had taken over 2.5 years. Note that this was only a partial payment. As stipulated in the DOAS and in accordance with the right-of-way law, payments to affected persons would not be given one time. The initial payment would only be for 50% of the price of the land. Final payment would only be given once the property owner had already vacated the property. At first glance, this would appear to be unfair to the property owner, as he or she would need to leave their property before full payment was made. But this is ultimately about balancing the rights of the affected persons with the rights of the taxpayers whose taxes are being used to purchase the right-of-way. This initial payment, final payment system gives the property owner an incentive to leave the property to receive full payment, instead of continuing to occupy it even after having been paid. But how would the affected person afford to move to another property without full payment? That is where the Mindanao Railway Project's entitlement matrix comes in. All public works projects have this matrix, and the MRP is no exception. The entitlement matrix lists in great detail what additional compensation property owners are entitled to in addition to payment for their properties. The entitlement matrix will be discussed in further detail in a future video. The OTB leads to the DOAS, which then leads to payment for the land. For crops and structures, this is covered by the Offer to Compensate, or OTC. Completion of the OTC leads to the Agreement to Demolish and Remove Improvement, or ADRI. The ADRI is where things get really complicated, as compensation for this depends on what the land was used for. Compensation for crops and fruit trees will be different from homes. This will be discussed further in a separate video. As of the date of this recording in June 2024, the property owner in Turil that had already received partial payment has yet to receive his OTC and full payment. Many more are still awaiting their DOAS, and others remain at the OTB stage. Payments were painfully slow, turtle-paced. The Mindanao Railway Project had funds for right-of-way acquisitions from past national budgets. Undersecretary for Railways Cesar Chavez confirmed this to the Mindanao Railway Watchers community via email in July 2022. At the time of communication, the project had an allocation of 5.85 billion pesos, of which only 799 million had either been dispersed to affected persons or downloaded to local government units. Funds were available at the time, but disbursements were slow.
I'd like to cite some of the major COA audit findings for OSEC for 2022. And they are the following. Number one, poor fund utilization in locally funded and foreign assisted projects. Out of the 45 locally funded projects and foreign assisted projects under OSEC, over 20 have disbursement ranging from 0 to 58.7%. I am right, Madam Chair.
We confirm that that is in the 2022 audit report of COA, Madam Chair.
In fact, in the report of COA, there is about more than 7 billion pesos of unused appropriations, Madam Chair.
As shown in the clip from the budget hearing for fiscal year 2024, the Mindanao Railway project was not alone in dealing with slow disbursements. Many DOTR projects were facing similar challenges, even when funding was available. In the case of the Mindanao Railway, the Commission on Audit had been highlighting how slow it was in using its allocated budget as far back as 2020. From 2018 to 2021, the Mindanao Railway enjoyed an influx of funds that totaled 10.4 billion pesos, the largest amount ever committed to the project and a far cry from the 50 million pesos allocated to the PNR back in 1964. But by the time of the last national budget of the Duterte administration, the Mindanao Railway project was excluded. This impacted the Department of Transportation's ability to continue to purchase land for the right-of-way. Even as early as 2021, things had started to change. While both the 2020 and 2021 budgets still included the Mindanao Railway, the 2021 budget no longer called out the Mindanao Railway right-of-way funding, merely including it under the term "but not limited to." By 2022, not only was the Mindanao Railway no longer a budget item, its right-of-way budget was also not highlighted. Reason for this change, and whether or not this was related to the DOTR not using funds that it already had, as highlighted by the Commission on Audit, was never clarified. At this point, we can only guess. The omission of the Mindanao Railway project in the Department of Budget and Management's National Expenditure Program continues to this day.
Yung sa Mindanao Railway System, ano ba talaga yun? Dead na yun or still alive? Para maklaro natin.
Hindi po. Ang tingin ho namin ang Mindanao Railway Project, yung Tagum Davao Digos, that 8 station, proposed 8 stations and about 103 kilometers is very, very, very important. In fact ho, nag-request ho kami sa DBM ng about 5 billion para doon po sa acquisition ng right-of-way. Hindi po kami pinagbigyan.
Okay, so alam niyo kung binigyan
We're
kayo,
not giving up po. We're not giving up on that project po.
you're not giving up. So may pag-asa pa.
Ang tingin ko po, napaka-importanting decision ng previous economic team ho yan at sinasang-ayunan ng kasalukuyang liderato ng Department of Transportation. Kahit sa NEDA, sa economic team discussions ho, hindi siya inaalis po.
Okay, thank you.
With no dedicated funding for the Mindanao Railway, where does the project get its funding to pay affected persons? According to an email from the MRPO on February 15, 2024, the absence of additional budget for the railway meant that right-of-way activities had to be paid from the shared right-of-way fund that the DOTR maintained for all of its projects. Exactly how much the MRP gets from the shared fund on an annual basis is unclear. To fast-track right-of-way acquisition for the Mindanao Railway, as well as other railway projects with similar land purchase issues, Marcos signed Administrative Order 19 Series of 2024 on the 25th of March 2024. The order highlighted the Mindanao Railway and 3 other railway projects in Luzon. It directed 9 agencies, led by the Department of Transportation, to work collectively to address right-of-way concerns and to streamline the process. The order also designated the Philippine National Railways as the secretariat for the committee, charged with administrative and technical support. Though still not the same role laid out in the original PNR law, it remains a noteworthy reintroduction of the PNR to the nation's southernmost railway venture. How this role eventually turns out remains to be seen. One can only hope that the proceedings for this committee will either be recorded or streamed live for the benefit of the country. If you believe that the PNR should adapt this level of transparency, leave your thoughts in the comments.